So our next block of presenters will be talking a lot about climate and attacking that from a whole heap of different angles. So we've got a team from USQ. They'll run that as a block, which we'll go for a bit over now. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Professor Roger Stone, who many people will be aware of, from USQ's International Centre for Applied Climate Science. And Roger's had over 40 years of operational and research experience in climate science, forecasting, and particularly with applications for agriculture. And he's going to talk to us about what our farming system might start to look like under a climate change system. Thanks, Roger.
So it's climate modelling, production systems, lots of graphs and so on, and maps. Hope that's okay, just to take you through that.
Sure. Yeah.
Also, I should acknowledge the World Meteorological Organisation, who are also working in the area, and the University of Southern Queensland, and the folk that have gone before me at this sort of work have contributed. There's Angus Pockita, David Freeland, in fact, mentioned before, Graham Hammer, and so on and so forth. Built up a lot of this work over many years. So first, I'm putting this whole work in some sort of context. There's quite a few climate systems out there. I run into this sort of issue a lot with a more perhaps general audience. Worked with Holger Mikey, Holger many years ago, some years ago, not many. The various types of climate patterns that are sitting out there, because it's quite a nicely complex sort of environment we're working in. It operates at a range of scales. There's on the right-hand side, these are the sort of climate patterns or climate periods that we work with. It starts at the intra-seasonal scale, which is roughly 30 to 50 days of return period, something called the Magnitudian oscillation. You've heard of the MJO. Then we work at the seasonal scale, seasonal forecasting, which runs in roughly yearly sort of patterns, commonly connected to something, the El Nino, La Nina sort of pattern. Still the main dominant force in our climate systems. The Indian Ocean dipole, you've heard about, connects back into El Nino and La Nina anyway. So that generally runs on a year-to-year sort of time scale, runs from roughly June 31 year to May of the next year, most of the time. Some years like this one, it's running a bit late, a bit different. There are biennial timescales, roughly 2 year sort of timescales in our climate patterns, and there's something called the quasi-biennial oscillation. Anyone heard of that? It doesn't get much airplay. If you say something about the QBL on ABC radio, just delete it out. Seriously, it's just too good to change its name or something. There's decadal patterns out there in our climate. So people talk about 10 years of wet, 10 years of dry. Out there, that's true. There is 10-year decadal patterns that emanate out of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean really drives our climate systems. And something called the latitude of the subtropical ridge. It has a 10.6 sort of time scale and a 22-year time scale and so on. But the high pressure belts come a lot further north than normal, about every 10 or 11 years. So instead of the highs being over Wagga in winter, they're over Emerald, right, for every 10 or 11 years. And that can dampen out the rainfall no matter what else is going on back here. Interdecadal pattern, 10 to 20 years, multi-decadal, and climate change as well. So I often get this, is it natural sort of occurring features or is it climate change or is it both? Right, they're all operating together. There's a couple more in there as well. I've forgotten about probably. So they all have their peculiarities. They still operate the same way under climate change. Climate change will influence us through operating through these patterns. It might change the intensity of the drought under an El Nino, for example, or the intensity of the wet during La Nina. So those patterns are still there, 10, 20-year patterns, El Nino type patterns. Climate change is having influence on there as well as operating a little bit of temperatures. I'm wandering around too much. Like this.
No, it's all good.
Okay, so they're all operating at the same time. Over the left-hand side, Olga did the opportunity to put some management systems, more sort of tactical management systems associated with the MJO, which is due in about 10 days. And sort of weather forecasts, sort of timescales through to more strategic decisions and very strategic sort of operations down here at policy levels of these sorts of scales. So they can actually connect at each of those scales, I guess, into some interesting sort of decisions. So the other interesting part of all this, Jeff Luff's slide, is Australia has the highest year-to-year rainfall variability on Earth, which I guess we all knew. Everyone knew that? highest variability on a year-to-year basis, some sort of coefficient of variability. So Australia, followed by South Africa, Germany, France, New Zealand, and so on down the list. And so that's quite interesting. In fact, Queensland has the highest variability in Australia, and all East Queensland does. That little area between St Lawrence and Townsville, if you imagine a sort of half-moon shape there, has the highest variability on a year-to-year basis, what you would expect, given its latitude and average rainfall, and a bit around the Gulf Harbour area as well. But the interesting part of this is the variability tends to be increasing, especially in the pastoral zones. I might just show you a little bit of this. Where they've coped with this for us, looking at percentage change in rainfall, which also links quite closely to pasture growth. Very strong up here in the Gulf country and so on. This was done before, this analysis was completed before the big floods a year or so back, a couple of years back. So there's massive variability going on in increasing variability in some parts of the country, shaded in yellowy orange areas, okay, not in blue, something that's on an annual basis. And trends, these are the good old Bureau of Meteorology sort of long-term trends, showing actually a fairly sharp increase in rainfall in the northwest of the country. We'll often see statistics saying Australia's getting wetter, but it's all to do with getting wetter up in the northwest, up in the Kimberley sort of region. And down here, most of the change is actually occurring in winter, the winter rainfall around where we are now, southern Queensland, northern New South Wales. And because of more intense subtropical ridge down through Victoria and New South Wales border areas, because you're getting more intense flow out of the tropics, coming out of Singapore or something, comes out to the Hadley, so comes down over the, hits the tropopause, and it's coming down over southern New South Wales and Victoria. There's a reason for that going on there. Probably having a bit to do with Southwest Texas. But it's not uniform throughout the year. This is the nicely intriguing part of this. So if you go to summer, there's a big increase in summer rainfall in the northwest. Not very much at all here around this part of the world in terms of summer rain, which is something. But these are just observed patterns. The trouble is you can run into the trap of this, that someone says, well, it was hotter in Paris in 1344 or something, therefore why worry about these sort of trends? But they're handy to look at. They also fit with things like frost, some work we did with Graham Hanna and so on. These are frost trends, these are numbers of frost. The Gundawindi is actually here. Gundawindi post office or something, there's a trend down, this is minus 1 degree in the screen, the Stevenson screen, which is slightly different headline. So general interest, bit of good news, not so much for Tamworth, sitting here. It's mostly those areas influenced a bit by what happens in the Coral Sea. You see everything. In general, especially this is emerald up here, big shift, and then some work that hasn't changed much. Dates the first and last cross up, something like emerald, getting close together. And I've updated this through some later sort of analysis, historical number of frosts over time. We decrease the number of frosts up through Gulawila, emerald that way in particular, and to some extent around here as well. In a different type of analysis, of course, the same, and the date of last frost being much earlier. That's a bit of good news. I can't say good news to do with climate change at the same time. But before you get into a lot of strife. But it's not all bad news, I'm trying to say. I'll just throw this in just to entertain myself a little bit. This is actually what goes on with this is the big protracted drought sort of pattern. What causes these huge droughts that we've been having, very intense droughts, such as we had in the Granite Belt and so on, northeast New South Wales. This is sea surface temperature anomaly. So this is the sort of stuff we look at, looking at ocean and atmospheric interactions. So this is September, October, November 2018. You can see much more than normal sea surface temperature values out here in the central Pacific, where the equator meets the international date line. And this has actually got a name to it. You see that horseshoe shape in the sea temperatures there. The Japanese have called it Madoki El Nino. It's where you're getting warmer than normal temperatures in the central Pacific rather than out here in the eastern Pacific. Does us a lot of damage. Getting warmer out there too, it's by the way. So it's right there, it's happening out in the Pacific. It's not local. It's just the forces aren't the local that are driving this. And what happens? You're getting this big outflow. This is what's called the 200 hectopascal velocity potential. Right? It's fascinating stuff. So you imagine the atmosphere is climbing up into the top of this roof here, up around where the international date line meets the equator or thereabouts, and this measures that outflow coming out the top. And it's huge. It's been going on over this sort of this period. There's protracted droughts, these lengthy droughts, 2 to 3 year droughts, fascinating. So that comes out, then you get subsidence come down right out, so the air lifts up over that part of the world, actually out here mostly. And then this is the subsidence this my colleague in the UK sent to me, coming back down and hitting this part of the world over those 2018, 2019. Massive subsidence that gave us the driest atmosphere ever recorded in this part of the world. The lowest dew points ever recorded. And the dew points, which dew point? The lowest dew points ever recorded was when this was happening. But it was all driven by the atmospheric processes up here in the central Pacific. Not what happens here. It's not driven, it affects us here, it's driven by something back up over there. So it makes the challenge of tackling climate change, if you like, back in the source, quite interestingly complex. What we do here won't change the patterns of what's going on up here in the central Pacific. What they do in China will. What they do in former Soviet Union and European Union and the US will change what's happening here, not what we do. So that's an interesting sort of area too. I thought I'd throw that in, just put in a bit of context of this sort of large-scale substance. You know, it's like a hairdryer on the table sort of stuff, substance. So these are these protracted events and what's causing them. Okay, so then they run these models, couple ocean atmosphere models. This is, you can get this on the Long Pattern website. We've all seen these, no doubt. They're showing nicely. There are high emissions or low emissions, decrease in spring rain, decrease in winter and spring rain, but not a decrease in summer rain, which is just coincidental perhaps with what's being observed over the last 50 years or so. Everyone knows that, I guess, already. So that's interesting. That's this is 2050. I'm not showing temperature. Temperature, I have because I was cutting back the number of slides. Slight increase in winter, 1.5 degrees, but 2 to 3 degree increase in summer under high emissions. So that seems to be mostly where the action is. Higher temperatures, but not much influence on summer rainfall. In fact, a slight increase in some areas. And we had a look at one model. We actually did a fairly deep analysis where you can pluck out the models that actually can reproduce the processes in the middle part of the atmosphere which produce our rain, middle level dynamics, and if they can pick up sort of the seasonal variability of rainfall as well. And there's only about 7 or 8 that can do that. The rest are in there partly for political reasons. CSIRO's model at the time might have now made it the top 7, but it wasn't at the time. This is the Hadley Centre model from the UK, thanks to Margaret Thatcher. She introduced or developed the Hadley Centre in Exeter, and they've got some of the best climate models for this part of the world, actually. So we do a lot of work here. This is on the Malong catchment. And it's looking at historical rainfall and projected rainfall and some runoff. So I think they use Sacramento model or some higher something here on the top area. And it's actually showing on a month-by-month sort of work here, change in rainfall, January up 13%, February up 9%. Then you go to May, reduction 33%, September, October, -8, -24%. Then summer comes through. That's generally the story. This is just one model. It's worth going into the detail of the sort of analysis. We did this for a certain cotton property down on down the road. So one way forward through this, of course, we're doing this in Southeast Asia, courtesy of the German government, is to say, well, this is interesting in a sort of a fluffy sort of way to see that those models are the best we've got. That maybe there's a reduction in winter rain, the summer rain may compensate, depending on the soil type and so on, and soil moisture. You can always use seasonal forecasting to pick your way through this, what might be called an incremental approach to tackling climate change. And then over the years, you get another year where it's going to be warm and dry, another year is warm and dry or something. Folk might start to change their practices a bit. So you can actually go into some detail, the chance of being in the highest 20% of minimum temperatures in a particular sort of pattern through January, March, and you can pick out the sort of detail there in southern Queensland quite well. I published in a nice little journal called Nature some years ago. So it could be done that way. So the other part, of course, is to go into decadal forecasting. Again, thanks to Margaret Thatcher's Hadley Centre, named after not Sir Richard Hadley, a name like that. He's a cricketer, isn't he? So, but it's another Hadley, the Hadley cell, and the Hadley cell was name. You start to go at 10 years, it's picking up these sort of dry periods to 2018. This is back to 2014. The English love this, the UK Met people, the UK Hadley Centre. I think this is very interesting where we've got to go. And surprised with the accuracy of this sort of work, which we want to continue going. So rather than going out 30, 40, 50 years, how valuable may it be to go 10 years ahead at any time and get with a little bit more confidence in these sort of model outputs. So thanks to some interesting people in the UK, we actually have staff now in the UK, their own staff, working on this sort of work. We hope will bear fruit in the next couple of years. So just a quick summary before I pass on to Shahbaz. Rainfall, consistent signal decrease in eastern Australia, but an increase in variability. Frost, a shorter frost season with fewer events. Well, Western Australia is different though, so these aren't my words, it's after Angus Popkeeper, thankfully. Western Australia has the longest season. My own words, though, value in using seasonal to decadal forecasting as an incremental approach to tackling climate change. And as you pick away through it, especially this decadal work, which has some climate change influences in there, but it's sort of more in a more practical timescale, trying to get the Murray-Darling Basin. Yield decreases in terms of converting this through to wheat yield. The work they did, I think just using in CSRO modelling, was only about a 10% reduction in yield at most, because of this this sort of influence of increased summer rainfall and storage and so on. So it doesn't show up as being a severe issue, and perhaps the reduced frost season may help in that overall regard. Yeah, okay. So with that, I'll thank you, and I'll pass over to Shahbaz.
Just one quick question. I just got one quick question here.
One quick question, yeah.
Could you please explain subsidence? Subsidence, sorry. Subsidence. Question came.
Subsidence. Subsidence is where things are subsiding, things are, it's sinking. Subsidence is another way, I'm not sure if it's not someone here in the audience, but it's where the air is sinking. So you get increase in subsidence coming out of a flow that's come from the equator down over Australia. This is happening a lot through southern New South Wales, Victoria. So you're getting increased subsidence, increased sinking air. Okay.
Does anyone have any questions for Roger or Isabel?
I only would have just asked Roger, that last summary slide was over which period, how many years?
The future for, I think 2050 was the projection. That's right. Yeah,
It's not the 10 years.
That's 2050. Okay, Shahbaz now speaking about the, where does all this go? If we can manage climate risk, what's going to happen to the residual risk? If we're managing climate risk through engineering systems or better understanding the climate. So, thanks, Shahbaz.
No problem. Good afternoon all. So this is where we're going to do next 30-40 minutes. I will present a couple of bridging slides. I call them bridging slides because this will bridge nicely with Roger's presentation and the insurance presentation that I would do and my colleague Mehmet would do, and our friend in Dr. Jarrod Kath sitting in Zoom. So I hope you will find this not boring considering Roger's and the earlier presentation. So let's go ahead and see. So here I am going to just discuss a framework, how we're going to integrate risk management and risk transfer together. I like this slide. So Roger mentioned a number of risks here. Roger mentioned frost, drought, probably cyclone or any other risk. So this slide shows what is the total economic cost of natural disasters here in Australia. And you can see here from 2015 to 2050, that is time scale Roger used, the economic cost will increase from 10 billion to almost 33 billion. So that's the economic cost in today's term, from 10 billion to 33 billion. And this is done by Deloitte Access Economics, so they are very reputable company, so we can trust it. So this report also indicates, so if this is the cost, what can we do to manage this one? And this report argues that if we have the resilient investment, so for example, I'll show you this one. For example, this report argues, so if we adopt best management practices, we could only manage 50% of the total cost of the natural disaster. For example, I have shown this slide. It seems busy. And this is the first time I'm putting this slide here in front of you. Actually, I was doing it earlier today, and Roger asked me I should present this slide. So this is from our project that we're doing in Southeast Asia for coffee sector here. But we're trying to understand what are potential adaptation strategies that coffee sector could adopt to manage drought risk. So the left side of this slide is a number of strategies that we are implementing to manage the drought risk for coffee industry. For example, Roger just had a very good presentation. So seasonal climate forecast is an avenue we could use to manage the climate risk. Then, for example, we're putting together best management practices for irrigation and best management practice for crop yield prediction. So we are investigating a range of adaptation opportunities that will help to manage the drought risk for coffee sector in Vietnam. And you see the bottom of the blue color that shows if we adopt all possible strategies, we could only manage 50% of the drought risk. And after this, there is a, I hope I can show you here. Not.
Is it
There's a-
turned
Is it one turned on?
on the side switch?
No. Anyway, so there is a yellow box there, which means that after you adopt a number of strategies, at one point you would arrive a limit to adaptation. So it means the economics of any new intervention would not make economic sense here. And this is where you start thinking about transferring what Roger just mentioned, residual risk to insurance industry. You know, you can manage whatever you can manage, start thinking transferring some risk to the insurance industry. The beauty of this framework is that insurance industry would be confident that they don't need to manage all risk. They only need to manage part of the risk, and what could imagine that this would allow them to put together some affordable and cheaper insurance products, which we'll show you in a second. So,
Yeah.
okay, so this is the scenario that we put together. This is a paper that we put together. So this is what we believe may happen if you don't integrate insurance and risk management together. On the upper panel, you see that there's a farmer, probably like me, don't know much to do. The farmer has no insurance and he's not following any best management practices to manage risk. And you will see that in future, his economic losses will continue to increase, and in near future, he will be looking to sell his property somewhere. In the second panel, where a farmer would only have insurance, initially, insurance payout would help him to survive for a short term, but considering climate risk, his insurance premium will continue to increase, and in a near short-term future or medium-term future, he would also be looking to sell his property. The third panel is where farmer doesn't have insurance, but he is following really best practices. He is adopting irrigation systems for moisture, is following Roger's forecast, so he may be able to survive in the industry a bit longer than the first two cases, but at the end he may be thinking that return to investment may be going down, and maybe thinking to sell his property. The last one is where when you integrate risk management and risk transfer together, then one can expect that the system, the agriculture system, whether you talk about cotton or anything else, will be more resilient. Can we go?
Yes.
This is another way to show the same slides here. The gray boxes or gray circles are the non-resilient forms, and the blue ones are the resilient forms. The size means it's the size of the property, so there are small farmers and some big farmers. Again, in the top one, without insurance, without any resilient investments or adaptation, you would expect only resilient farmers would survive in the next period, but their farm size will likely to increase. In the second panel, you will see if they have insurance here with no resilience. Again, the farm size will increase, but they would be selling their properties in the immediate future. I won't go into detail, but the last one, the last one is where you integrate insurance or risk transfer with resilience, and you expect more resilient farming. A point to note here is that for me, from my understanding, adaptation should go first. You adapt to risk as much as you can. And if you see the third panel, a lot more farmers are getting into more resilient stage rather than when you compare with insurance. So the best strategy would be adapt to climate risk as much as you can. And if you can't adapt to some of the risk, then think about transferring risk. I'll stop here. And I will invite my friend Mehmet to then discuss some of the initial findings for a project that we're doing together with Willis. We have developed some insurance products for cotton, and that's why we are excited to show you here. My friend or colleague Jarrod, Kath, we have put together a decision support tool. This is the first time we will be trying that tool for you guys, and we will be very keen to have your feedback. So.
Thanks, Shahbaz, and hello everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation, Lisa and David. It's been a long time since I've been to Gundawidi, I've got to say, and I think saying to a lady earlier on, last time I was here, Gun wasn't even running, so I was able to go and get it. Coming up the new highway and coming across, now I can get a photo at long last. I used to love watching Gun down in Melbourne, so my wife will be very happy to hear that. So today, as Shahbaz suggested, we're going to have just a bit of a chat about the insurance side, just a quick touch on the global issues, which is very much Roger's and Shahbaz's area, but just how it's affecting the insurance market. The insurance products that we're seeing around today, or not seeing, because there's not a lot around, I've got to say, for agriculture. And then, as Shahbaz said, on to Jarrod to talk a little bit about the sort of insurance products and prototype that hopefully will help the industry going forward.
You point it this way to change that.
Okay. Yep. Okay, around there more. So here's a very quick overview of, say, the world as we should know it, and climate change, climate risk, whatever you want to call it, and whatever your political views on any of that, put that aside, but it's definitely something that's affecting the insurance industry and insurers' concern about risk, and we all know about that because we constantly see increased premiums. It never seems to, just is relentless. And very frustrating for us as insurance brokers going to clients and telling them, I'm afraid it's your renewal's gone up again this year, particularly when you look at North Queensland and the cyclone, attitude towards cyclone for insurers in North Queensland is just horrendous. And, you know, the costs for premiums for people like unit owners, and that's through the potential of cyclones is just out of control. And it's, if we could do something, we would, but it's just, someone said to me, they do it because they can. That's the sort of situation. So very frustrating. So the sort of thing we're working on is looking at more cost-effective, sustainable ways of looking at insurance, particularly agricultural crop insurance, So very quickly looking at those, the Economic Forum 2020, Roger know all about that sort of thing. The top 5 risks seen around the world are weather risks, the other one being weapons of mass destruction. Oops. And warmest period, the past 5 years, increasing water temperature, rising sea level causing impact on windstorm events, impacts of climate change causing hurricanes, long-term droughts resulting in bushfires in Australia. And the major impacts of these events are affecting major industries cost-wise, revenue-wise, insurance obviously, agriculture obviously, and utilities. And that flow-on effect, the lack of contribution from their revenue, is affecting the rest of the economy. Very quick map of the world, probably 2 years old now, so not the latest, but we've even got Debbie on the wrong side of Australia, so that's really good. Yeah. And so even since then, you can see along the bottom, there's been a string of more catastrophes with our saddest bushfires costing $100 billion in lives again. So that's a difficult situation. Weather explains, and again, Roger and Shahbaz, I keep referring to them, but this is their area. 8% of the variation in yield is caused by weather events. You can see those, they're the major ones down the right-hand side there. And now we look at some of the products that are available. So most insurance now for crop insurance, agricultural insurance, is pretty much single peril, as we call it, named peril, single peril. Something like fire, that sugarcane has fire cover, hail has quite a few you know about. There's more that single peril approach. Multi-peril crop insurance has been attempted that quite a few times over the years, but pretty much unsuccessful. And the major reason is the cost is just no appealing to farmers, and understandably, and less than 1% of farmers in our survey that we've recently done don't participate, not interested. NPCI, of course, is, you probably all be aware of this, is prevalent in other countries because it's mainly subsidised by governments. For example, US 65% of farmers' insurance is subsidised by the government. So obviously they take it up, but you can't even mention the S word here in Australia with the government. It's just off the table, but we're looking at other ways, other mechanisms to bring government into participating in some way, but just straight subsidies of premium is off the table. But with the product I'm just about to talk to you a bit more about, which a lot of you would have come across in your travels, named peril index-based covers are feasible and don't necessarily require government assistance. Again, these are the sort of products with the Rolls-Royce, as one of my colleagues from London came out and presented at the Royal Press Club a couple of years back and called it the Rolls-Royce, and we've stuck with that one, is MPCI. Everyone would like to have it, but it's just too costly. And so with our projects, DCAP through DAF and the National Farmers Federation project we're currently working on, we've looked at more practical, effective, affordable, and something not like MPCI that is sustainable, stays for a bit longer. There needs to be some sort of choice for growers. There's really no choice for agricultural insurance at the moment of any value to them. It's all limited. MPCI needs, if we're going to look at MPCI, it needs government subsidy. Won't work without it. But alternatives such as parametric insurance are simple, but not perfect, as I'll show you in a moment. But they're available without government support. Complicated, and there's a little bit of an example, and the one that Jarrod will give you is a better example, but just the basics here. If you look, that was a drought type parametric insurance diagram on that side. If the attachment was, say, 50 millimetres of rain for a drought situation, anything less than 50 millimetres of rain, you're in trouble. Therefore, basically the insurance pays out. So if you have whatever the season that you've chosen, if it's say January, February, I'll show an example in a second, less than 50 millimetres of rain in that season, the payment's made. That's the difference. There's no review of damage. You don't have to have any property damage. The payout is made. And that's the basis of parametric or index insurance. It's simplicity. And so payout formula, the payout where you decide the limit that you require. The other one, on the other side, we're more advanced on in that we've put something in front of government through DAF, and that's a mutual, which I'll touch on after, but it's cyclone parametric insurance. So if the cyclone track passes within an indemnification zone, we put this together for cane growers, so for all the 12 sugar regions along the coast, where the mills are pretty much within 50 kilometres of the mill, we've used that as a 50-kilometre radius. So if the cyclone passes within 50 kilometres of the centroid, usually the middle of your property, then basically the claim is paid on the basis of whatever the trigger is, and the trigger in this case could be a cyclone 3, category 3 or greater, which is going to cause some damage. So the benefits, I guess they're all pretty self-explanatory. The transfer of funding to, irrespective of property damage. You don't need to have property damage for the payout to occur. Programs tailored to reflect clients, so you can design what you want with the product, depending on where you are, your risk exposure, that decides on the premium rate, and you decide on whatever limit you want to take. So you don't have to insure for the whole value of the property like you do with NPCI. You just insure, you think 50,000 is sufficient for cost of production for me. I won't go out of business if I've got that amount or whatever that amount might be. That's all you have to insure for and apply the rate to that amount. So no exclusions, there's nothing. All it needs is the event to occur within the parameters of the policy, and then the payout is made within 14 days. There's plenty of insurance markets around the world providing the cover. They're keen to do it in Australia. Very limited in Australia. There's a couple of insurers offering it, but not very well promoted, I've got to say, in Australia. But overseas insurers with this system are very keen to be involved. No lengthy loss adjustment process. There isn't a loss adjustment process. The claim's paid. No local infrastructure required to settle claims, and no restrictions on the use of the claims payment. You don't have to actually replant, or even if it was a building, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be damage to your crop. It's just the loss is paid, and you use the money best way you can. Now, as we call basis risk, the elephant in the room, there's always got to be a downside, and probably some of you have tried this type of, or your clients who've tried it have found it not to be too appealing. The index, sort of to describe it, is probably that second point, the risk that the insurance does not accurately reflect the actual risk. So if you have let's say a bond reading in Dolby, and you're just outside Dolby, and it was, in that example, I go 50 millimetres, Dolby's saying that it was 60 millimetres for those 2 months, but you think on your farm, you definitely didn't get more than 50 millimetres. Well, the reading, because the policy says the bomb reading is what triggers the policy, will be based on the bomb reading, which means in that case, even though you feel you've had the loss, because you didn't get your 50 millimetres, because the bomb reading is higher, you wouldn't be able to be paid. So that's an example of basis risk, which is a real challenge, and the challenge is for BOM to make the availability of reading a lot broader, and that's a whole different subject. And once they can do that, then it takes a big chunk of that basis risk away. The other thing might be that you have a lot more down. Your yield loss is far greater than what the sum insured, the limit you've selected. You might only select $100,000, but you've suffered $1 million. Well, $100,000 is all you're going to be paid. So that's basis risk, not getting what you thought you're going to get or what your true risk is. Here's a very quick graph from, these are out of a project we're working for National Farmers Federation, and I'll just talk about it very briefly later, on mutuals and cooperatives, a way of, rather than buying cover individually, buying it in a group buying power, getting that advantage. So the biggest risk, which was out of the, about 300, 198 around Australia, decided that rainfall, drought is their biggest risk. There we go. Okay. Now here's a very quick example of what I was talking about before with rainfall. In a drought situation, let's say less than 50 millimetres is what you insure for, because you're very worried about anything between, say, January and February, you're in the Dolby area. The $1,000 per millimetre is what we call the tick value, the amount you insure for. So everything below that, over the historical period, from 1992 to 2017 in this case, below that line is where you'd be paid a claim. So at $1,000 per millimetre below the 50 millimetres. So back in 2005, you would have got 27,000, 3,000, 2007, and 9,000 in 2014. So that's how the basics of it works. And we'll get a bit of an idea on indicative costs from Jarrod when he does a quick run through in a minute. Another quick graph, won't take a moment, and this is to look at the survey of what farmers are willing to pay. What's the appetite? Because cost is the biggest barrier from everything we've gone through. We all know everything. So many other things to be spending money on, all the input side of things. So this is another challenge. So the general feeling, if we're looking at drought being the biggest concern, the surveys show that the highest, most positive levels between $2 to $5. It's not per hectare, but it's actually per $100 per hectare. So a rate of 2.2 to 5%. We call it rate on line. So if you had $100,000, the majority are prepared to pay $2,000 to $5,000 for drought cover, depending on where you are, of course. But that was the average across Australia. And I think from a discussion we had with NFF and the farmers interviewed, 4% seems to be the sort of number most farmers would be okay in including a cover for purely drought cover. Not NPCO and all the others, just drought cover to be sufficient to protect them in these worst situations. We've mentioned a bit of hail cover. This is a very new product. It's not, and I'd be interested to know if anyone's seen it in action yet. But just looking at the hail insurance we're talking about, it relates to a new device, a sensor many sensors installed on a farm to register the size of hailstones, and claims are paid out based on, it's parametric again, it's based on the size of the hailstone and the intensity of hail during a hailstorm. So nothing to do with the damage that occurs, purely based on the size of the hailstone, which I've seen it, but not seen it physically. Seen the diagrams, etc. And an insurance company, American insurance company, has the patent and they're looking to install. Has anyone come across those yet? At this stage? So we've got requests for quotes out there at the moment with them, which I'm expecting any time, because it's going to look at this coming season, it needs to be very soon. How the quote for that approach, parametric approach, would compare with the conventional hail type insurance approach. So that should be available pretty soon. All that's needed, it's not a complex exercise, because doesn't matter what damage it causes, it's just the event happening. The estimated total value of the cotton crop on the farm size and field footprint to get a feel for how close the fields are together. So hail, as you know, goes through a certain strip, so that gives an underwriter a feel for what their dollar exposure is going to be, and farm coordinates. That's all they need to give an indication. So I mentioned about mutuals, and that's the last one with this new product we're looking at. So rather than farmers, we give an individual quote, bring a group of farmers together, cotton farmers, for example, and we call it it's called the Cotton Growers Discretionary Mutual Fund. This is what we're doing for the cane growers for cyclone at the moment. So if a group of them were to come together, and the contributions or premium, same thing, instead of putting all the money, giving it all to the insurance company, big proportion goes into the fund retention, which is owned by the farmers. They buy above that insurance up to a level they feel, with Shahbaz and Roger's experience with this history, what that likely is to be. And anything above that's very unlikely to save premiums, go up to a certain level. But that fund returns are put below there. If the loss doesn't occur, or if the losses don't exceed that fund retention in that any one year, then the funds there remain owned by the membership to reduce the cost for future years, to grow this so that there's less paid for this insurance part. So that's the concept of the insurance mutual, which again is commonplace. This NFF project we're doing looks at overseas countries, and it's quite common, very common in other countries. They come together. The difference is they've got 200 or 300 years of working on these, and they've got quite used to the system, so where it's quite new to us. But it's the sort of thing that mine should be open to, because all the money going to insurance companies, like we've seen with those cyclone situations, it's just years of saying, oh, we're concerned about cyclones, but it's been quite a while now, and the premiums are just at an outrageous level, causing people to virtually have to sell up property. I know people who talk about having to sell their unit because they can't in cash, because they can't afford to pay the insurance premium, which is just outrageous. But this sort of concept can help keep the money belonging to the members and ensuring above a catastrophe level. It shouldn't be exhausted or through hail claims during the year, then the insurance pays the rest of the claims for the remainder of that year. So there's no exposure there for the members in any one year. It should be exhausted. Anyone get that thinking? Yeah? It's self-explanatory. I'll go through really fast. Group buying power, expect the premiums will be cheaper on a group basis than on a single basis. The members, DMF administration mutual fund, they retain the unused or surplus in the fund. They're potentially going to be bigger premiums, as you expect, for more insurance component. Gives them confidence to join because they're all part of the membership group. Peak Bodies has a great job. So Cotton Australia, for example, could be very good for members to know that, say, example, Cotton Australia, cane growers are behind the concept. Group encourages members to financially control their own destiny rather than every year paying over insurance companies and then dropping out. They've got their own future at their own hands. Administration reviews, ease of participation, comfort for all farmers to have the same coverage, so not as complicated, and the potential to include other risks. For example, we did a hail one, there could be the potential of doing drought or some other cover within that same mutual and having the same concept. And I'll just finish off with just a few quick graphs, which I don't need to talk about for too long, just showing from this National Farmers Federation project we're doing, Roger? What is it?
No, it's good.
Okay.
Just reading the graph.
Okay. There's nothing here. As part of that project, there's a few hundred survey of who are in mutuals and who aren't and what benefit. So most have never been in a mutual or cooperative. Cheaper input. What benefits do you receive from your cooperative or mutual membership? Or cheaper outputs, particularly for cooperatives. That doesn't necessarily apply to an insurance mutual, but cooperatives, they save money there. They don't get much out of it for cheaper insurance because there's virtually nothing. There's only about 3, I think, in Australia, where cooperatives and mutuals were very prominent back in the 50s. We've done history on that whole project to show it, and they've just gradually dropped off because of legislation, corporate controls. I'm sure you would have known co-ops around your area, grain growers, the barley board, all that sort of one. A lot of those dropped out of co-ops and become grain co or whatever they might be. So all that sort of thing, legislation has caused that to be nowhere near as popular anymore. And this one here, we Why aren't you a member of a cooperative or a mutual? Most of there's nothing relevant in my area to be looked at. Lack of awareness was very high on the list. Insufficient value, so pretty general there, but really not too many people involved, so they couldn't comment too much more. And I think this is the last one. Which of the below factors would make you consider joining a mutual? Cheaper insurance, so that would make a big difference. Cheaper inputs for a cooperative, and higher prices for their outputs would be very appealing as well, which can be helped in a cooperative. So I think that, yeah, that covers those areas. And I don't know if we just jump across to Jarrod now, do we? Do you know if Jarrod's on standby?
Jarrod is on standby. So
Probably any questions about any of that would be.
Any good questions?
Now questions or after? Yeah, whatever you like.
Anyone got any questions about anything while we're doing the transfer of the technology? No?
There were that few that were texted through, weren't there?
yeah, no, but that's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that wasn't Jarrod.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I'll pass over to Jarrod Kath, who's back at USQ, who's going to present, as Shahbaz said earlier, on the remote, the insurance tool that he's been, it's a prototype, but it has been, the basis of it has been through the work he's done with our London people to understand what the sort of rating could be from the insurance companies that would apply to the areas that Jarrod has done from a historical data point of view. So pass over to you, Jarrod.
Hello, can you all hear me and see me okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, and you've got the website there, the Drought Insurance Estimator tool up on your screen there?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks Russ. Thanks everyone. So as Russ was saying, we've been developing a tool to help introduce the concept of index insurance to farmers and the agricultural industry more broadly. It's a pretty new concept, and so it does take a little while to get your head around. And so we're hoping that through this tool that we can introduce the concept to people. They can jump online and have a play, get an idea of how much it would cost, you know, and start giving them some more insights into how it could be useful or not for them. So I'll scroll down here to the tool itself. So if you go to the website, if you have a chat to Russ or Roger or Shahbaz, they'll point you to where the website is, and I'll drop it into the chat box later. But if you go there and you scroll down, you'll see this, this little tool here that allows the user to click on a map. So I've just clicked on Gundawindi for now. So it's pulling rainfall data from a 5K grid from all across Australia. So you click on your location, and then you can enter in some information about the risk you're interested in. So this is a drought tool. So this is looking at the cost of an index insurance for drought. So here I've put in Gundawindi, as I said before. You can select the months you're interested in. So for example, if you're worried about a particularly dry summer coming up, or you might be interested in something in winter or anything like that, you can select the months that you're concerned about that risk occurring during. And remembering back to what Shahbaz said before, you want to pick things that you can't manage. So the leftover risk that you can't manage, extreme events that might happen, in every 1 or 10 or 1 or 20 or 1 or 50 years. You don't want insurance for something that's going to happen every second year, because the insurance will cost a fortune. So we've got here an example for Gundawindi. We've put our attachment at 50 millimeters. We've got our months at January and December. So if you remember back, we had a pretty shocking year last year. And you can see down here on this graph at the bottom, the farmer would have got a payout at say $3,000 a hectare as a result of that particularly nasty summer we had last year. This value here allows the user to enter in how much of a payout they want to get for each millimetre of rainfall below the attachment they are. So for each millimetre below 50 mil, you get a $100 payout, and you can change that. You can go down to $10 per mil. You can put it up to $1,000 per mil. It's quite flexible. You can change that around as you want. It's probably conceptually easy to think of this in terms of per hectare. So if you know what your, for example, cost of production per hectare is, You might go, okay, if I have a failure, or if it's less than 50 mil over the summer, I'm going to lose $3,000 or $4,000 a hectare. If I can cover that, then I'll be happy. So you might put in, say, $100 per mil, and you would have got a $3,000 hectare payout. Up on the graph above the payout graph here. So this is just this is showing when you would have got paid out over the last 30 years. You can see where the rainfall has been going up and down over that last 30-year period, and it shows it dipping below that threshold or attachment level last year, and so triggering a payout. This box up the top here, they show the rate on line, which Russell was talking about here. So this is suggesting that the premium rate, so that's the ratio of the premium to the payout, would be around 7 to 11%, and you'd be paying about $300 to $560 a hectare for that. This is based on the pricing model from London, as Russell was talking about before. So it's a pretty, a pretty real world estimation of what these insurance would cost. There's a few things missing, like GST and stamp duty, but it should give you a pretty good ballpark figure of how much this insurance would cost. The other thing I'll mention while I remember is this is just for drought, but you can easily adapt it to other risks. So I think I had a question before from Kieran about low micronair. I've just Googled that because I don't really know what the cause of low micronair is, and it said something about cold weather or something like that. So you could easily adjust this if you knew what your months of risk were, and you knew, if it was below a certain temperature or, below a certain amount of radiation or something like that, then you can easily structure an index insurance product to help you manage that risk also. So it's very flexible, and that's one of the benefits of it. So I'm just thinking, if we have the time, perhaps if someone wants to yell out a location they're interested in, the months they're interested in, and the amount of rainfall they're interested in, we can try and go through a quick interactive example just to help people get an understanding of how the tool works and how index insurance may or may not work for them.
Yeah, it would be good to try one more location, because this is the first time we are actually testing this tool live. It would be good to test it on another location and see and identify which are your critical months where the cotton crop is on risk, and we see how this tool will actually work. So I appreciate if somebody just want to identify a location.
How about you try Moree?
Moree, okay, here you go.
All right. Sorry, just bear with me for a second.
While you're looking at that, Jarrod, can I just
Yep.
usual side of things, where the potential is there. You can see the rates on that particular, it's nowhere near the 4% I was talking about that everyone would like to see. But with the group buying power, there is the potential, with more than potential, there would actually be the reduction of those rates, and the need that I talked a bit about the Queensland government, if they were prepared to, rather than look at subsidies, but to what we call capitalise the mutual, to see the actual members have contributed, a part of the action. And that's certainly, we've been to Treasury about it, and they like the whole concept of members participating. So they're prepared to capitalise the mutual to get it to the right level, so that the farmers' proportion won't only be the 3 to 4%, which is manageable, then it could be feasible more on a mutual basis. But for the moment, we're just looking at an individual quote that Jarrod's working on now.
So I've just got somewhere just west of Moree here. It's on a 5K grid, so you can click anywhere basically all over Australia if you want to get an estimate. So I've just clicked this location here, just a little bit west of Moree. Did you have any particular months you were interested in looking at?
Work on the same ones.
Same ones, yep. So you can see there, just from going a little bit west and south, that we've got a few more payouts occurring. The premiums are a little bit more expensive. So we're getting 10 to 14%. So these estimates here, this is based on the pricing model from London, and they estimate what they think the market would price that risk at. So if you were interested in taking this forward, you could have a chat to Russell or someone else, and they would act as a broker, and then they would go to the market and try and find the best price for you to to match your needs. So we estimate that in the market, the price would be somewhere between that $500 to $700 per hectare of whatever it is the unit you're looking at. Does that make sense?
It's scary.
Yeah, but as I said before, you can alter the prices there as well. Sorry, I shouldn't do that one presenting. You can alter the thresholds as well. If you don't want to, it depends what you're growing, I suppose. I mean, if you're growing something that the cost of production isn't as high, then you could look at tick values of around 10 millimetre and your premiums might be $50 to $70 per hectare. You can, of course, lower this threshold here as well. So 50 mil might be a bit high, might be triggering too much, and that, of course, means the premiums will be higher. So if we reduce that threshold, then we can see our premiums coming down quite a lot. So if you were looking at an event where you're only getting 30 mil over that summer period, then your premiums would be much, much lower, around that $200 to $300 per hectare. And you'd still be getting payouts in those quite bad periods. So it's one of the pros and cons of this index insurance malarkey, I suppose. It is very flexible, and because of that, it can take a while to get your head around, and there's lots of things to watch out for. And you have to think carefully about how you structure the product, and you have to think carefully about those things called basis risk that Russell mentioned before. You have to make sure that the threshold you're picking is going to correlate well with a really bad season.
Yes. Just a minor clarification. So the premium that Jarrod is indicating is not per hectare. This is based on what farmers wants to do. If he wants to have a tick value per farm, so he could have the tick value that he thinks for a farm of 100 hectares, he could have a tick value and rainfall thresholds based on per farm. But this is flexible. He could put it per hectare as well as per farm. So for example, in this example, it could be for 5 hectares of paddock that he wants to put up. So this is a flexible, so it's just a clarification. That's not per hectare, just per farm. So farmer could choose any number or any policy that reflects his risk. Thanks.
Okay, then I think, is there any questions?
There was a question on Zoom.
Yeah.
Do you see that question there?
Yeah, I'm just pulling it up now.
Just repeat that for everyone.
So there's a few there, sorry. There's just the one from Kieran about low micronair, is it?
It's actually,
One about accounting for stream flows as well as rainfall.
Yes, this is something we've discussed. The tricky thing with the stream flows is we would need to specify a gauge that the insurance companies would happily be linking that product to. Then if that was to occur, then you could theoretically have your index structured to stream flows. Russell and Shahbaz, I know you've done a bit of thinking about that. Did you want to say something on that also?
Just a additional clarification. I know that we are often asked to put together some index-based product for water availability or stream flow. The key concern here is that from the insurer's point of view, we want to tackle a parameter or an index which is stochastic, which is not influenced by any policy or anything else. So stream flows and water availabilities and all other indicators, which are very relevant for the education industry, is subjected to government policies and many other parameters impact the availability of water. So it's very difficult to then integrate the actual stream flow on top of what government policies and regulations and the water allocation. So it's not very easy, but we are thinking about, so far, no solution yet. But if we can do this, that would be very awesome.
Any other questions in the room? No, thank you very much for that, gentlemen. That was a very comprehensive and thought-provoking series of presentations. Much appreciated.